Melee's landscape has been in a bit of a weird place with the release of Ultimate that caused some of the game's best players to turn their focus to the newer game over the last couple of months, causing stacked major events to become scarcer than they've been in quite a while. But the exciting results and viewer numbers of Get On My Level last weekend has appeared to breathe new life into one of the greatest games of all time that refuses to die. So those who are jumping back on the bandwagon as the always hectic summer of Melee starts may be wondering what the top 10 looks like nearly halfway into the 2019 season. So with this video, I'm going to give you all the information you need to put together your own post-GOML top 10, as well as giving you my own opinion and reasoning for what my top 10 looks like. So let's start by discussing the only two real contenders for the #1 spot right now, Hungrybox and Mango. Hungrybox has nearly undisputedly held the crown of the best Melee player in the world for over 2 years now, and I imagine he doesn't plan to stop this streak anytime soon. Unfortunately for him, the cracks are really starting to show, most prominently against Zain, who double eliminated him at Come to Papa 3 in late April, and recently at GOML, where he finished outside the top 4 for the first time since the Big House 6, losing to two players who were attending their first Melee major of the year. But other than those two blemishes, Hungrybox has posted up a solid and consistent year that we've come to expect from him, which makes him a great candidate for the #1 spot. Mango fans have longed for the day where Mango would once again be a contender for the best player in the world, and following him finally ending his tournament winning dry streak, he's right there. He's taken wins off of all three former top 6 players who are still active and only lost 4 games during his run to first place at GOML. However, his Genesis 6 performance that is marred by 2 bad losses hurts Mango significantly, as it calls into question the consistency that is shown by his other 2 performances. So then who takes the #1 spot? I think the clear answer is still Hungrybox, but Mango is so close. All I think Mango needs to close the gap is to place well at another major while Hungrybox loses to a player that he shouldn't be dropping sets to, or Mango needs to just keep the momentum going and take first at the next major he attends. These 2 placements are the only 2 on the list that I think it's pretty hard to have a good argument against. The remaining 8 are so exceptionally hard to rank for a number of reasons, with the most glaring one being inactivity providing a lack of data that makes personal opinion way more into placement than ever before. So I wanted to explicitly say this to remind you that my ranking is not gospel and to look at the data yourself to form your own opinion. These videos are meant to make you a more informed Smash viewer, not a mindless person who repeats what they hear online. So with that squared away, let's talk about Leffen. Leffen spent all of 2019 up until GOML having his sole focus into Ultimate and put up some respectable results in that game, but he said he's done with the game for now and coming back to Melee. This puts us in the awkward situation of having to rank Leffen solely based on his Get On My Level performance, during which the Swede showed minimal rust by cleanly 3-0ing Hbox and getting 3-1 by aMSa, who he was up 3-1 in sets against last year, only dropping 1 at another event where he was a bit rusty, Flatiron 3. I don't think we should expect Leffen to drop another set to aMSa anytime soon, and he's 6-6 against Mango over the last 3 years, so I don't think we should look too much into this one loss. So with all that in mind, Leffen takes the 3rd spot for me, in a separate tier below Hungrybox and Mango because of his lack of results, and above the next couple of players because of his perceived consistency. This then brings us to the highest variance portion of the list, which for most people will include some variation of Zain, aMSa, Wizzrobe, and Plup. So let's briefly overview their years. The breakneck pace that Zain has been improving at over the last couple of years is insane and serves as a shining example that it's never too late to start playing Melee. He's one of the 4 players this year to take a set off of Hungrybox, but he hasn't been able to close out a set against either of the former top 6 players he has faced, losing 2 3-0 sets against Plup, and losing in a last stock Game 5 situation against Leffen at GOML. The biggest argument against Zain is how many potential roadblocks he can hit with bad bracket luck, such as against aMSa, who he's lost his last 5 against, top level Captain Falcons, and Leffen and Plup, who he's a combined 1-7 against over the last 2 years. aMSa may also be having the best year of his Melee career so far, with him already boasting 2 second place finishes at major events with still a half a year to go. The most impressive thing about aMSa's year so far is easily his head-to-head spread against the active members of the former top 10, which only has 2 losing records against the current 1st and 2nd best in the world. However, what brings aMSa back down to earth is his long string of losses to non-top 10 players at smaller events, which also includes Swedish, SFAT, and S2J along with the 4 listed. Where you place aMSa depends a lot on how you weigh peaks versus consistency, as well as how hard you want to punish other players for inactivity. Speaking of inactivity, we have Wizzrobe, whose sole event of 2019 was GOML, just like Leffen. And similar to Leffen, Wizzy put on a great performance in Canada that included knocking Hbox out of the event by reverse 3-0ing him. Wizzy and aMSa have played a set a year over the last 3 years, so it's hard to glean any information from that loss, and he's traded sets with Nun and S2J in the Falcon Ditto over the last couple of years, so we can't really learn much from that either. So where you want to place Wizzrobe depends heavily on how much you think his placement and performances from last year should weigh on his ranking this year. Lastly, we have Plup, who also turned his focus to Ultimate early on this year, but continued to compete lightly in Melee during his stint in the game. Before GOML, I think most would have had Plup in the 3rd to 5th range in the ranking, but his absolutely abysmal performance at the event in the context of what we have come to expect from him makes ranking him much more of a challenge. His best win for the year is Zain, which is worse than all 3 previously mentioned players, and his loss to aMSa Genesis was also extremely out of character for him, as he had won the last 5 times they had met. But any casual fan knows that Plup is a tremendously talented player, but his results for this year haven't shown it so far. So then how do we rank these players? I think regardless of how you place the other two, the critical argument here is between Zain and aMSa, who I personally have in my 4th and 5th spot. And for me, aMSa takes it over Zain. aMSa may have worse losses than Zain, but his peaks are higher, his head-to-head record spread against the top level makes a good run much less dependent on bracket luck, and his 2 losing records against Hbox and Mango are ones I can realistically see him turning around soon. But Zain isn't far behind at all, and I can't wait to see how this fight between the two to maintain the title of a top 5 player will pan out in the coming months. With those two locked in, 6 and 7 are easily filled by Plup and Wizzrobe for me. Plup has only had one outlandishly bad performance, and his greater attendance at events, alongside a perceived greater consistency after he knocks the rust off, puts him above Wizzy for me. This then brings us to the final 3 spots on the list. And before we talk about the 3 major contenders, let's look at a couple players, in no particular order, who fell just a bit short of being considered for the top 10. Mewtwo is probably a name you've been surprised not to have seen yet, especially as we've ranked 2 other players who've only attended a single event, but Mewtwo's single 33rd placing at Genesis 6 is one of, if not the worst performance of any player we will talk about in this video. He's for sure an immensely talented player who could easily jump back into the mix, but placing someone in the top 10 whose best wins are Zeo and Taffokins just doesn't seem fair to the other players. Swedish Delight was inches away from taking a set off of Mango, which would have been historic for the Sheik main, and almost certainly would have secured him a spot in the top 10. But without it, his resume for the year just has too many red flags to give him a spot, such as 2 losses to 2 unranked players at separate events, a 49th at Genesis, and his troubles against Fox showing up yet again in his records against KGH, IBDW, and Hacks. Duck has had pretty solid showings at the events he's attended, and even just barely missed out on a top 8 at Genesis 6 after running through Bananas, Fiction, and Hugs in losers at the event. The Michigan Samus main has got a lot of good records and performances under his belt, but he's missing either that one big win like he had over Hbox last year, or a solid record against the players right above him to be able to move up into that 10 spot. With how hot he was looking as 2018 closed, and how inconsistent his fellow CLG teammate was, I expected PPU to finally pass SFAT on the rankings, but with how the first half of 2019 is shaken out, it doesn't look like this will be the case. His performances this year can best be described as lukewarm, with a weakness in the Puff matchup being a potential concern moving forward. But PPU and all of these previously mentioned players still have the whole second half of the year that changed their trajectory, and with all of the talent that exists in this 11 to 20 range of players, the top 10 is far from set in stone for this year. And so that brings us to the 3 players that will finish off our top 10, SFAT, aMSa, and S2J. Without his GOML performance, SFAT's claim to a place in the top 10 wasn't looking too certain. He'd accrued a lot of bad losses at a handful of different events, showing that it wasn't just him having a bad tournament, and continued on his historic losing streak against Zain, bringing it to 14 straight sets lost. But beating Plup for the first time since NorCal validated in 2017, while also evening his record against aMSa for the year, provided the boost needed to secure him a spot in the top 10. aMSa's relative inactivity is much more understandable than many of his peers due to the time and money investment required for him to come from Japan for US events, so he for sure deserves more leeway in that department than most. His resume is reminiscent of Wizzrobe, as he is mainly carried by his potential demonstrated last year and one big win, with aMSa's coming against Mango. His losses to SFAT and aX are to be expected, as he's traded sets with the two over the last 2 years, with him being 3-4 against SFAT and 2-3 against aX. And his losses to Triff continue to show us how painful of a matchup Peach can be for Yoshi. And last to the podium is S2J, who has been extremely active compared to his peers, as he has attended 9 tournaments so far this year. And generally with attending more events comes more losses, which is apparent by his worst loss category, but they're not as nearly bad as they first appear. Something that I think is very telling of how a head-to-head match will go in the future is what happens the second time 2 players meet at the same event. At Saving Mr. Lombardi, S2J won his second set with Santi. At TTT 78, S2J won his first and third sets against Faceroll. At Puya Pound and Schism, S2J won his first and third sets against Lucky. SFAT is the only exception here, with S2J sweeping him at Fight for SoCal and SFAT sweeping him at Full Bloom 5. Also, S2J does lack a big win to his name despite getting many chances, but having beaten Zain, Wizzy, and aX isn't too bad at all. So how do we rank these final 3? The easiest for me to place is SFAT at 10, because although having a Plup win is amazing, his lack of consistency is a huge point of concern for me, as well as Zain essentially being a guaranteed loss when they meet in bracket. And I've gone back and forth a lot on who should take the 8th spot due to how complicated it is to rank aMSa, but I think S2J should be rewarded for his relative consistency, high attendance, and ability to take sets from players ranked above him on a semi-consistent basis. And that about does it for my post-GOML top 10 ranking. I'd love to hear down in the comments what your current top 10 looks like and how it compares to mine. I'm totally cool with you completely disagreeing with my list. Just make sure you give your reasoning behind why you think X player should be ranked above Y player so we can all become more well-rounded fans through discussion about this amazing game. And that's about it from me. I've been SaveAsUntitled, I'm glad to be back, and I'll see you guys next time.